So good afternoon, everyone. This is a special meeting of CLERB, Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board, on August 23rd, 2022. Our first agenda item is roll call. I don't believe our secretary is present. Mr. Parker, could you call the roll, please?
Chair Delaney,
Yes.
Vice Chair Pintar,
Present.
Pastor Spriggs, Dr. Brown, Ms. Tina Ayub,
Present.
Ms. Kenk,
Here.
Ms. Federico Mondragon,
Present.
Mr. Ware, Mr. Wilson,
Present.
Ms. Youngflesh. Chair Delaney, you have a quorum, 6 members.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go, to new business. Number 1 is continuation of our teleconferencing meeting option pursuant to government code section 54953E. Council, could you please read the motion for us?
Sure. The appropriate motion, if your board would like to continue teleconferencing next month, would be to find that CLERB has reconsidered the circumstances of the state of emergency and that state and local officials continue to recommend measures to promote social distancing.
Thank you very much. We have a motion.
So moved.
Who is that? Okay,
Marianne.
Ms. Pintar, and then second by G.I. Wilson. Okay, any other discussion? Could we please take roll on that, Mr. Parker? Sorry.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Hey, it's all good. Chair Delaney,
Yes.
Ms. Pintar,
Yes.
Ms. Tina Ayub,
Yes.
Ms. Kenk,
No.
Ms. Federico Mondragon,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson.
Yes.
So there are only 5 votes for that.
Okay, we'll wait for Mr. Ware to sign on, and then we'll come back to that. Reconsideration of amendment to CLERB regular meeting schedule. Mr. Parker, would you like to present that, please?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Delaney. Last month, well, actually for the last couple of months, we've been talking about perhaps there were some issues with the County Administration Center for the second Tuesdays of the month. The Board of Supervisors meetings were probably going to conflict with the CLERB meetings. Therefore, our room was not available. We discussed moving perhaps to the County Operations Center, but that just wasn't very feasible. So now we're back looking at the County Administration Center, and there was concern of which day of the week to choose. So that we don't lose any board members, we decided to look at Tuesdays anyway. Around that same time, the clerk of the board put out the proposed schedule for the Board of Supervisors for 2023. Now that schedule is not really going to be approved, I don't think, until December. However, based on that proposed schedule, I would like to present to you a slate of dates, one for each month in 2023, all of them on a Tuesday, some on the second, some on the third Tuesday. That's the best that I can do. So Chair Delaney, with your permission, I'd just like to read off the dates and then turn it back over to you.
Please do. Thank you.
And again, all of these are Tuesdays. And at this point, while we're virtual, of course, we'll still continue at 5:30. But my understanding is you folks said once we're back in person, it would be 6 o'clock. Is that correct? Or no, Ms. Delaney? Yes, I believe so. I believe that's what was said. So if that's the case, these are the dates for 6 o'clock.
Okay.
Okay. So January 17th, February 14th, March 21st, April 11th, May 9th, June 20th, July 18th, August 15th, September 19th, October 17th, November 14th, and December 12th. Now, if the change, that's the date, those are the dates. If that changes after the Board of Supervisor approves their schedule in December, I'll come back to you. But otherwise, those are the dates I would propose that we do our meetings for 2023. Chair Delaney.
Thank you. Do we want to take a vote on that? Okay, we will take a vote. Do we have a motion? Okay, we have a GI making motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Pentar, did you have a question or you would make a motion?
I was offering to make a motion, but someone else got to it, so we're all
All
good.
right, thank you, all right? That being the case, any other discussion? All those in favor? Mr. Parker, could you take a roll, please? Thank you.
Sure, and I would like to point out that it appears that Dr. Brown is here as well. Dr. Brown, are you here?
Yes, thank
All
you.
right,
Sorry.
All right, thank you, Dr. Brown. We will take the vote right now. Chair Delaney, for the
Yes.
for the meeting schedule, yes. Vice Chair Pintar.
Yes.
Dr. Brown, we are voting on 12 dates I just proposed for the 2023 calendared board meetings. I don't know if you heard those dates. Did you hear
Yes.
those dates? All right.
Yes.
And are you in favor of the motion?
Yes,
Ms. Keen, Ms. Keen,
I'm sorry, I'm having technical issues. Yes.
Okay. Ms. Kank,
Yes.
Ms. Federico Mondragon,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Chair Delaney, the vote carries 7-0.
Okay, great. Let's go back to reconsideration, excuse me, continuance of teleconferencing, since we were unable to take action.
Chair
Um,
Delaney,
Yes,
I'm sorry, under Robert's Rules of Order, a vote can only be, can come back for reconsideration only if the prevailing vote requests it. So in this
Oh.
case, Ms. Kenk would have to make a motion to reconsider.
okay.
Otherwise, the vote is final.
So there was no vote, so that means that what happens then?
There was a vote and the motion didn't carry.
Oh,
So
I'm sorry. So then,
the only person who voted no was Ms. Kenk, so she would have to bring a motion to reconsider the vote if she wanted. Otherwise, the vote stands and the motion did not carry.
which means we'd have to revert back. We couldn't teleconference. Is that what you're saying?
Right, or you still have your 30 days from the last CLERB meeting, so there could be another special meeting to take another vote.
Okay, all right. Ms. Kank, would you like us to reconsider?
No.
Okay. I'd like to call for a special meeting for that particular subject. I will get with Mr. Parker. Mr. Wilson?
Yeah, I'd like to have the vote polled again, because I don't think, did Mr. Brown get to, Dr. Brown get to vote?
He was not here, unfortunately. We had a quorum, but we did not have the number of votes needed to pass the motion. And Ms. Kink is unwilling to.
But he was here. He was here when we began, then he had a technical difficulty. Now he's back.
I'll leave that to council.
His vote wasn't registered at the time the vote was called, so.
So since his vote wasn't registered, we just then have to go with the one person that doesn't want
Correct.
to continue. Okay. Ms. Kina,
Are we able to raise it at our next meeting?
well, I'm going to call for a special meeting for just that particular purpose. So that we can, the majority of the board will have the opportunity to.
I understand, but can we just raise it at our scheduled meeting?
I think we're doing it now because we're outside of the 30 days. Is that correct, council?
That's correct. So the next, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, the next regular meeting is outside the 30 days. So your next regular meeting would have to be in person, but you could vote again to continue after that.
Council is correct.
Okay. So we'll let you know on the.
I call for a point of order, because in the past, we've had individuals drop out during voting and come back and vote. So, I'm not accepting the fact that we can't all vote.
Okay, so Ms. Hoffman, to be clear, Robert's Rules of Orders prohibits this vote being taken again if the dissenting vote says no, correct? Is that
That's
what I'm hearing from
correct.
you? Okay, so therefore, go
I
ahead.
can
Ms.
look
Hoffman.
into the technical difficulties issue if there's any type of exception for that, if you want to move on to a different agenda item.
Okay,
in
we'll
the
do that.
meantime.
Okay,
But I'm
Thank
not
you.
aware of anything like that. I'll take a look though.
okay, thank you. If we had another special meeting for this particular subject, are we within the 30 days from our past meeting to do that, or is today the last day we can do that?
No, we should be okay for the next
Okay.
week and a half or so. I think our last meeting was August 9th, in which
Okay.
the 30 days from that point forward.
Okay, thank you. All right. Number C is San Diego Sheriff's Department policy recommendation response to create fentanyl canine policy and procedures. Mr. Parker? Would you like to present that?
Sure. As the board and the public may recall, on May 10th, we made a recommendation to the Sheriff's Department to basically actually update their detention canine program policy and detentions canine manual to include that the fentanyl trained canines will be used for searches of contraband in all areas, to conduct sniffs of all persons entering a facility, to include visitors, inmates, and staff, and to conduct sniffs of persons already inside of a facility, to include visitors, inmates, and staff. And the proper terms when we used it before was inmates. At this point, it's incarcerated persons. So I'm just reading to you what our recommendation said. Okay, but it's incarcerated persons from this point forward. So the Sheriff's Department implemented that policy, and their policy now says detentions canines certified and approved for department use may be used under the following conditions: to search for narcotics, to include fentanyl or other paraphernalia the canine has been certified to detect, to conduct people sniffs, to search for multimedia or other electronic related materials, and to search or sniff persons entering a facility, to include visitors, incarcerated persons, and staff, and to conduct search sniff of persons already inside of a facility, to include visitors, incarcerated persons, and staff. So the Sheriff's Department implemented that policy and procedure. And with that, Chair Delaney, I don't have a request to speak, I don't believe, for that item from the public at this point, just
Right,
so
thank
you're
you.
aware. Actually, that's not true. There is one request to speak from a member of the public, and
Okay.
you want me to go to
Please.
that person right now?
And I'd like to note that Mr. Ware is now here.
And Mr. Ware is here. Very well. Noted. And at this point, we'll go to Yusef Miller. Mr. Miller,
Yes, can you hear me?
we can. Your 3
Yusef
minutes starts
Miller.
now.
Yusef Miller with the North County Equity and Justice Coalition and the Saving Lives in Custody campaign. I thank you for this recommendation. I'm very happy that the Sheriff's Department has accepted it and will be using the sniffs for all people entering the jails, whether it's inmates, visitors, and staff. And I want to say for the record, ask for the record, does staff include deputies as well, not only civilians? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Next,
Mr. Parker, could we
there is-
ask? Oh,
we have one other request
Okay.
to speak, and that would be Darwin Fishman, Dr. Fishman.
Good evening. I'm back. Darwin Fishman, North County Equity and Justice Coalition and Racial Justice Coalition in San Diego. I want to add, we had at HRC today, County HRC, the Sheriff Ray presentation, and Yusuf asked him about your meeting tonight. And Yusuf's been very kind. He didn't know anything about your meeting, what was on the agenda, which I think is absolutely extraordinary, considering obviously this has a direct impact on the Sheriff's Department. I hope you all get that together, because what Sheriff Ray did, whether it was intended or not, is highly disrespectful of CLERB and your work. And for him to openly say he didn't know about it, he had no interest in coming. So I hope this is taken seriously. I appreciate the step you're taking. It also suggests that if you are serious about staff, and as what Yusuf suggested about deputies, he either is very dismissive of it or he's very deeply worried about it, because that might be the real reason why drugs are coming in and why the problem's completely out of control with drug overdose and deaths. So I think this is a great step. I think the scanner should be used as well as the dogs. We've seen it before in other facilities. You can require it. It's not something radical. Certainly, if the staff as well as the deputies are not bringing in drugs, they shouldn't have any problem taking the extra time going through those procedures to ensure that. So thank you, and I hope that you continue on this track with doing this work.
Thank you, Dr. Fishman. At this point, Chair Delaney, I do not see any additional requests to speak.
Ms. Pintar, do you have a question?
I do. I don't know if Sergeant Tingley can answer the question. And if not, I would like an answer about whether staff includes deputies or just civilian staff. Do you know the answer to that, Sergeant Tingley? We do have the letter from signed by Sheriff Ray.
Yes, yes, I do have the letter, ma'am. And in this letter, it says that the department it says here, department use may be used under the following conditions, and staff, deputies would be part of that staff. And so within that policy, it states department use may be used under the following conditions, and that does include deputy sheriffs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant. Appreciate that. Anyone else have any other questions? Thank you, Sheriff's Department. We appreciate that.
You're
All right,
welcome.
Next one is policy recommendation. San Diego Sheriff's Department search or scan all persons entering detention facilities to include all employees. Mr. Parker?
I think as everyone on this board knows, and members of the public who may be in attendance, we are going to, we're obviously aware of the situation and the deaths in custody and whatnot. And I want to make sure that everyone understands how proactive we're going to be. We're going to make recommendations that may seem a little outside of the box or whatever the case might be, but I think we need to address all angles. And this recommendation, I believe, addresses something that really hasn't been talked about. It's been thrown around, but really hasn't been discussed seriously, at least not by our board. So I'm making this recommendation to CLERB that the Sheriff's Department physically search or scan all persons, and all persons entering a Sheriff's Department operated detention facility to include all Sheriff Department employees, county employees, contractors, and any persons conducting county-related business. We also, of course, want to include that all persons obviously include social and professional visitors and incarcerated persons upon booking and transferring between facilities or re-entering a facility after having departed it for court or medical treatment. If you recall, we made a recommendation to the department a few months ago to scan incarcerated persons who are transferring between facilities, and that was declined as perhaps going to be causing operational delays. I want this policy recommendation to be all inclusive. The number one priority is to search or scan or somehow search anybody, to include staff, deputies, civilian employees, contractors, county employees, everything we just said. And then also to close that loophole on folks, anybody that's actually entering the facility, whether they're transferred out or leaving it for court or medical. So that's the gist of the policy recommendation that I bring before you. And Chair Delaney, I see that there are 2 requests to speak from members of the public.
Okay, go ahead with them, Paul.
Dr. Packard, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Dr. Packard. Your time starts now.
Yeah, I actually raised my hand on the former item. Is it okay if I quickly ask a question about that?
Chair Delaney?
I have no problem with that. Is it okay, council?
Yeah,
says yes.
the sheriff said may be used, and I just wonder if may be used would mean they don't have to use, which would give them the out that, well, we're not going to use it for our staff, for example. So what does may be used mean in terms of their ability to not use it if they don't want to?
Are you clear for me to answer that, sir?
Sure.
So may does mean exactly that. It may be used to search employees and staff. And that's exactly what the policy reads.
So it'll be your discretion then, Sergeant?
Yes, yes, ma'am. It would be the discretion of the department when to utilize that.
Okay, can I go ahead on 2D then?
Of course.
Yeah, that, I guess, I hope you all take that into consideration, that maybe get the policy changed and not say maybe. But on searches and scans, I'm Tom Packard with the Showing Up for Racial Justice North County. I strongly support your recommendation that the searches or scans be done for all sheriff staff, sworn and civilian, entering the jail and using the same standards used for inmates. I also hope you'll expect the department to follow any best practices standards for this work, and then you will effectively rebut any rationales. Paul Parker just mentioned operational delays, if that's going to be a rationale for not doing it. I think in the long term, a cost analysis would be doing these things. It might cost more money, but they ought to prevent money on what you pay out in lawsuits in the future. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. I mean, Packard, sorry. Mr. Parker, is there another, Dr. Parker, is there another member of the public that would like to?
There is. It's Yusef Miller.
Okay, Mr. Miller, hi.
Hello, Yusef Miller, and I support this this item here. And it's for the best for 100% contact, 100% visibility on everyone that's entering and potentially exiting this facility. So yes, I support this, and I hope all of you will support it as well. Thank you, Tom Packard, for bringing up the question about maybe, because that might be something we need to look at, whether that has actually been implemented, vice just being a policy change, a timeline to be implemented as well. Thank you.
There are no other requests to speak, Chair Delaney. Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Thank you. And do we have a motion on this recommendation? Ms. Pintar?
I move to support the recommendation.
Do we have a second? Okay, Mr. Wilson, we have a second. Any other discussion from the board? Okay, Mr. Parker, could you call the roll, please, for the vote?
Chair Delaney,
Yes.
Vice Chair Pintar,
Yes.
Dr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Keen-Ayub,
Yes.
Ms. Kank,
Yes.
Mr. Federico Mondragon,
Yes.
Mr. Ware.
Mr. Ware, you were muted. Thumb up or thumb down?
That's a thumbs up. That's
Thumbs
a
up,
yes.
okay.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes,
Chair Delaney, your vote passes.
Okay, great.
Or
Thank
he
you very
vote
much.
passes.
All right. Next one is authority for the executive officer to work with county staff to pursue legislation and/or to add a policy to the county legislative program in support of increased transparency and civilian oversight of peace officers and custodial officers. Mr. Parker?
This is very similar to what we asked for last year, and this board approved the authority for me to work with county staff to pursue this legislation. Basically, what I'm asking you folks to consider is, as we all know, CLERB is looked at, quite frankly, or maybe not as much anymore, but for a long time, it's being a rubber stamp for the department because a lot of our, all of our case discussions occur behind closed doors. There's really nothing that we can say to our complainants, but we really also can't say anything to the subject officers about what our investigation entailed, the depth and breadth of the investigation. So what I'm hoping that this board allows me to do is to work with the county to add to the legislative program to support or to be at least aware of any kind of bills that come up in this year's legislative session that would increase transparency of civilian oversight entities in California, specifically ours. That's where we are. That's my thoughts. And so back to you.
Any members of the public have any comments?
Mr. Miller does. Mr. Miller.
Hello, Yusef Miller. Thank you for increasing transparency. Every opportunity we get to increase transparency and accountability is best for all of us, and especially the CLERB. As the audit report showed some holes and some deficiencies, I'm so happy that we're moving in a direction of more accountability, transparency, and teeth behind our investigation of law enforcement and any claims against them. So thank you.
Thank you. At this point, there are no other requests to speak. Chair Delaney.
Okay. I have just one thing I'd like to say. First of all, I support our executive officer in working to increase transparency, 100%. My only concern, my only thought is that I think the board should weigh in on any proposed policy or policy changes dealing with closed session protocols prior to the EO's discussion with county staff in this area. And this is so that we're all on the same page and we all agree to those policies. Other than that, 100%, I'm with you. Ms. Pintar?
I just wonder, I don't know, Paul, if you know the answer to this question. Are there any other county commissions, boards or commissions that have open, close, well, they wouldn't be open, that are requesting the same sort of transparency for their closed sessions? I don't know if there's a model for this elsewhere, maybe in another part of the state or in another state. I just don't know what it looks like.
Yeah, I understand that, Vice Chair Pintar. No, all California civilian oversight entities' hands are tied from a decision that was made back in 2006. It's called Copley Press decision. Last year, there was a bill that was put forward to just basically overturn that. And so that affects all of us in the state. So no, there are no other entities in the state, to my knowledge, that have case discussions in open session. Subject officers can't be named, things along those lines.
Okay.
Now I can tell you, if I may,
yes,
back
please.
in the day, all right. So prior to 2006, our case discussions were held in the open. Our investigative reports were released to the public. The only information that was not released was information that was deemed confidential at that time, which were statements made by subject officers through the course of surf responses or interviews. However, everything else was done in public.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what it looks like. I don't know what the downside would be. I personally feel like there are many times when we review these cases that I really wish the public could hear how hard we push and how many hard questions we ask and why we are, what our limitations are given the scope of our role. And it's as frustrating to us sometimes that we aren't able to do more in some cases because of the limitations of our what we were able to do. So I support it. I just was curious. I'm not entirely sure what it looks like. That's all.
Nadia? Ms. Ayub? Tina Ayub?
I just want to second everything Marianne Pintar said. That's it.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, is there a motion? Ms. Tina Ayub?
I make a motion to accept.
I second it.
Who is the second?
Dr. Brown.
Okay, Dr. Brown. Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor?
You may take the vote, Chair
I'm
Delaney.
sorry, can you do the roll call?
Chair Delaney,
At last, yes.
Vice Chair Pintar,
Yes.
Dr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Kinayu,
Yes.
Ms. Kank,
Yes.
Ms. Federico Mondragon,
Yes.
Mr. Ware. He gives a thumbs up, that's a yes. Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Chair Delaney, your vote, the vote passes.
Motion-
The vote- yeah, you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. Motion passes. Thank you very much. Okay, and the last one is adoption of the CLERB 2021 annual report and the 2022 semi-annual report. And again, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Parker.
Thank you, Chair Delaney. I'm going to try to share my screen. Before I do that, let me just give a little bit of a preface here. On Friday, this coming Friday, we'll have our first ever administrative analyst. She's coming from another county department, and I'm very much looking forward to having her here because she will be the one that's going to help with making sure that all of the data that we have is we can have it at the tip of our fingers to release to the public. We sit on a lot of data, and we've not capitalized on that to assist the department, to assist the county, and to assist the members of the community to make better informed decisions about how best things might be done, if possible, right? So that's that, which was why there's a delay in getting this report. However, because of that, I wanted to make sure that for the first time ever, that we also did a semi-annual report. Now, so we'll do it twice a year, and as we, I think, mentioned before, the county charter, the code and our rules and regulations indicates that we can make these policy recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. We make them to you folks, but we can also then make sure that the Board of Supervisors is aware of them. It's something that we've never done, I don't think. We've done it kind of indirectly. I want to do that every 6 months, hence the reason for a semi-annual report. And the change also, once 2 years ago, there was a change that within 60 days of you folks adopting our annual report, I am to present this annual report to the Board of Supervisors. I am scheduled to present next Tuesday. I'm meeting with the board officers this Friday and then presenting to Board of Supervisors next Tuesday if you folks adopt these reports. So with that, I'll just do a real brief presentation. I'll share my screen. Please let me know if and when you can see it. Somebody just give me a shout out and tell me you can see the screen.
Yes.
All right, so let's see what we can do here. All right, so basically, I think everybody, and obviously we all know what our responsibilities are, but for the folks who are in attendance, our main priorities are to receive and investigate citizen complaints from anyone, not just citizens, but anybody. Investigate those complaints. We have been really focused, as you'll see from this presentation, on the investigation of deaths and policy and procedure recommendations. We also are tasked with investigating uses of force resulting in great bodily injury, any use of force at a protest or First Amendment protected event, and discharge of firearms. And those incidents, deaths, and all three of those, we can do without a signed complaint. We talked about the policy and procedure recommendations, and we also issued this annual report. The purpose of the annual report is, yes, okay, it tells you, it gives you statistics, but I'd like to make it somewhat relevant, right? To tell you what the systemic issues and trends are, kind of report out on what we're seeing over the last year. And I think that by putting our recommendations out there and our overall findings, that kind of paints the picture of where we are. So for 2021, as you can see briefly here, we had a down year as far as case numbers in 2020. We think that had something to do with COVID. And in 2021, so last year we had 130 cases, and you'll see when we get to 2022, we're on track to do way more than those. But at this point, last year our new complaints, and this is interesting in that it's fairly similar. You'll see the difference between what we're doing so far in 2022, but this is fairly common. Law enforcement and detention facilities were usually about even, right? Probation departments, anywhere from 4 to 5%, maybe up to 8%, a little low last year. We didn't have very many complaints about the probation department at all. And the Sheriff Court Services Bureau only had 1%. And we'll see that there's a little bit of a change to that so far in 2022. But that's the breakdown for last year as far as the Bureau. Obviously, our focus has been, yes, we focus on every complaint that comes in, every misconduct allegation, every excessive force, you name it. That is we're tasked to investigate those. But I want to just talk about deaths right now. And you can see that last year, out of the deaths that were 25 deaths last year, 25 total deaths, 18 of those were in the Sheriff's Detention Facility. So 72% of the deaths last year were from the Detention Services Bureau. 6 of them were from law enforcement services. And 1 of them was from probation and none from the Court Services Bureau. Now, how does that break down even more? So as far as the jail death, the detention facility death, that's what everybody's focused on. So here is the breakdown of the facilities. So 50% of them from Central Jail, and you can see, you can read the slide, moving forward. So Vista's usually next, and then Bailey. They're usually 1 or 2 and 3. Central always seems to be toward the top or at the top, for obvious reasons, I think. I mean, just that it's the busiest one, is my understanding, right? So here's the ethnicity of the breakdown for the folks who have died in the detention facilities last year. 50% of them were white. Latinx was 44%, Black is 6%, and then there was no anything other than those 3. Now, the manners of death last year. And we've talked about this. I mean, we've had robust conversations with members of the public, with the department, with this board over the last year and a half. The majority of the deaths are natural deaths. Last year, drug-related deaths were 1/3, and then there was a homicide and suicide 11% each for last year. So our findings, almost 50% of the time for the allegations, we had 527 allegations that we investigated last year, or that we closed last year, 527 allegations. Out of that, almost 50% of them we deemed, and you actually deemed, were justified. 15% we said were unfounded. 19%, almost 1 out of 5, we said there wasn't enough evidence to go one way or the other. And then 2%, which was fairly common, which is fairly common for us, 2%, 2 to 5%, we sustained those allegations. Summary dismissal was 17%, which means we didn't have the jurisdiction for whatever reason, okay? So last year also, we investigated 74% of our cases, and we procedurally closed 26. So that procedurally closed, that was up near 48%, 45% over the last couple of years, which is when folks make a complaint with us, but don't sign it under penalty of perjury and they never follow through. Our staff have been diligent in getting signatures on these cases, going out and meeting the complainants where they are. We promised the community we would do that. We promised this board we would do that. And that's exactly what we're doing, which is why you're seeing the decrease in numbers for the cases that are procedurally closed. And that's due solely to our investigators being proactive, which is very difficult too. And one of the things that's not reflected, and I will reflect in this 2021 report, we have to remember, in 2021, we have been granted 3 additional positions. We filled 2 of those positions by July of 2021. Those 2 investigators weren't really fully up and really running until September. So we then had 2 additional investigators up and running by September. But 3/4 of the year had already gone by where we had worked with basically 2 investigators and a supervisor. So it's still a heck of a lot of work that's been done. And we finally have filled that last position finally a week and a half ago. So we should see come the end, last half of this year, once our new investigator gets up and running, but specifically next year, one would think that our cases, number one, they're being investigated more thoroughly. So the numbers may not necessarily go up. They may not go up as much as one would think, because these investigations that are being done now, and I think our board can attest to, they're a heck of a lot more thorough than they've ever been. We do think there'll be a slight uptick in cases that are completed, and that's with the additional staffing. But here's the thing that I think has been overlooked for many years at CLERB, but we're really pushing these recommendations. We made last year in 2021, we made 12 policy recommendations. 6, of course, were accepted, as you can see, and 33% not, and 17 pending. Here are the ones that were implemented last year. The professional and sanitary food service, there was maybe a deputy or 2 was serving food with their feet by pushing the tray into the cell. So the department implemented all these changes. They defined the cell extraction. They made sure that the video system was checked and logged. Those checks were logged. They mandated the use of de-escalation. Mandated. It was permissive before. They mandated. One of the biggest ones, the last 2 deal with deaths. We made a lot of recommendations about deaths. And the Sheriff's Department obviously implemented our response to death scenes. They implemented that with the signing of an MOU several months back. They also implemented, we recommended that not to seal as a matter of routine deaths occurring in custody, because in families and the community and the media, nobody could get information about the status or what was going on. And the department discontinued the routine sealing of certain of those cases. One's not accepted. Now, these were last year. These are, so 4 that were not accepted. The first one, safety checks during the booking process. We wanted to have that happen. That was not, was not accepted, not implemented. We also recommended that they don't use cells with inoperable cameras. That was not implemented because there was a concern that, you know, if there are no other cells to use, that would be the cells that would be used. And then the last 2 are simply policy, just for us to recommend that the department clarify some of the verbiage. The actions didn't change. It was the verbiage in the policies that CLERB found was a little confusing, but the department chose not to accept those and felt comfortable with the verbiage in the policies about enhanced observational housing, whether pertain to court attendance or social visits. So those are the ones that were not accepted. And so far, we made these recommendations in 2021. Probation department, they've had some changes and they're continuing. They're almost, we should have a response to our death scene investigation recommendation very soon. And then we also, to the Sheriff's Department, we asked that the detention investigation unit interviews would be done outside of view of other incarcerated persons for those obvious reasons. So we're waiting for responses from those 2, one from the sheriff, one from probation. So for 2022, I'll touch on this briefly. Everything's pretty much the same pattern that I just went through with 2021. As of last Friday, or whatever the 20th was, I think it was last Friday, we are already at 106 cases. 106. That's, you know, we're on track to far exceed 130, and we don't know why that is. We don't know. It could be the deaths plus the great bodily injury cases plus the increased response from folks who are in custody, as you'll see here in a minute. This is incredible. This is something we haven't seen before, as far as 6 out of 10 of the complaints. Now it says complaints. Now, to be fair, that's not true. And I need to change this. It's actually cases, right? Complaints are things that are made by someone. Cases are things like we have deaths and we have uses of force resulting in great bodily injury that are not filed with us by anybody. So I do need to change that. So just so we're all aware, these are cases, but almost 6 out of 10 are from the detention services, detention facilities. You'll see Court Services Bureau. That's a very high number for Court Services Bureau. We don't normally get a lot of cases from that bureau, but we have 10%. Probation's again at 4, as we mentioned before. It's fairly common. But law enforcement services for the sheriff, way down. Normally it's around 50%. So this is thus far through August 20. So the deaths. So at this point, you can see out of the 22, there are 22 deaths thus far this year. 16 are from the detention services. Actually, you'll hear different numbers. You're 15 or 16. The department did not have to report one of them. They did not have to report. It was a compassionate release, but they did. So it's actually 16. And we look at all 16 of those. So we're 4 in law enforcement services, and then 2, 1 deputy involved shooting and 1 possible suicide related to Court Services Bureau presence or activity. So that's the overview for the deaths thus far this year. As far as the detention services, where they're happening, again, 50% for Central, and you can see the numbers for Vista and George Bailey and Las Colinas. The ethnicity, again, for 2022, this is not in the annual report. I overlooked it, but it will be on the finalized version. Again, here's the breakdown for ethnicity. White 44, Latinx 38, Black 6. Filipino, there was 1 Filipino and 1 other Asian. That was the breakdown, so 6% each. The manners of death. Now, you remember the manners of death from last year. They were pretty clear. 33% accidental overdose, whatnot. Thus far, we only have manners of death for 3 of the cases, just 3. All of the rest are pending. The medical examiner's office is backlogged, presumably due to staffing, but also the increased number of overdose-related deaths in this county. So much so that they've had to contract out some of their toxicology work, which is a big step for them to do that. since they have their own in-house toxicology lab. So at this point, my hope is at the end of the year, at least I'll have some better numbers to provide to you, but this is all I have right now. So as far as our findings that we've done thus far for the cases that this board has closed as of August 9th, really, 4 out of 10 justified. You see the not sustained, which that's a low number. But the reason we believe only 10%, as opposed to previous years where it was up at 30, 40%, body-worn camera. Body-worn camera has been a wonderful tool for CLERB because we get to look at the videos and we get to see exactly, at least from the camera's perspective, what's said and the actions that are taken from whatever the camera can capture, which has resulted in this lower not sustained rate, result in a higher unfounded rate, probably. And then sustained, we're 5% of the allegations that we've done thus far. It's a little over 300 for the first 8 months of the year are sustained, which means we think that this board thinks that the deputy or probation officer has done something wrong. The number of closed cases, again, look at the number of procedurally closed. This is a testament to the staff. So only 28%, still a lot, but we're working on getting that down. Finally, we have made 26 policy recommendations this year. That too is unheard of, 26. And as you can see, 1/3 of them were accepted, about 1/3. Pending, we're a little over 1/3, and then not accepted. Let's talk about them. Let's break them down right now. The implemented recommendations, the ones that the department, primarily the sheriff's department, have implemented. Research technological devices to monitor health and safety. Incorporate technological device uses to identify incarcerated persons in medical distress. Now, our recommendations clearly said we want the department to look at something along the lines of a wristband, a Fitbit, something like that, right? Other entities, maybe 2 or 3 in the country we were aware of that do that. This department, the sheriff's department, said that they're going to research and they're going to incorporate. They didn't say what, but they committed to obviously doing that, and that they've continued to do that, and they were doing that. So I'm excited to see what they can come up with and what they implement as far as technology to think outside the box to monitor the health and welfare of these incarcerated persons. We ask that they strengthen their family liaison protocol to mandate meeting with family members at the conclusion of an investigation, primarily into death in custody. The department accepted this recommendation. We recommended for the department to make naloxone and Narcan readily available and to educate incarcerated persons on overdose signs, naloxone administration, and CPR. They implemented both of those. We asked the department to update, as you just heard, the fentanyl canine policy. We don't need to talk about that again because they implemented it. And to the point of the board members and the public, it's a may, but they did have their policy. Their policy does say may use. Other recommendations that were implemented: pre-employment screening for bias, implicit, explicit bias. They were already doing this for many, many years. So we've included that as an implemented recommendation, and that they shall begin their body-worn camera recording prior to initiating any law enforcement contact. Now you're going to see there's one pending that's very similar to this, but there's a slight difference. So these are the sheriff's department has implemented these recommendations. Not accepted. You will see, if it wasn't for the racially disparate policy recommendations that we made to reduce or eliminate racially disparate policing practices, the sheriff's department would have accepted just about every one. I mean, the numbers would look better than they look right now, but it's a huge topic as well. So we want to make sure we don't overlook this. What was not implemented were the reduction of discretionary stops, eliminate stopping or contacting people solely for lower level offenses. And the first 3 up top there, actually all of these on this slide, we made in reference to hoping to reduce racially disparate. The department's response, which we talked about last, maybe it was 2 weeks ago or last month, I think it was 2 weeks ago, was that many of the things that we had recommended, number 1, were already in place, and number 2, would wind up being discriminatory in their own way if they were to be implemented. So that is, those are recommendations about racially disparate treatment were not accepted. We also continue to make recommendations about death. It doesn't matter what kind of death, any death. That's my primary focus here as the executive officer at this point. So we made recommendations about pursuit. If you recall last year, unfortunately, there was a pursuit in which the person who was driving a stolen vehicle unfortunately ran a red light and collided with someone who died. And so this board recommended that there be no vehicle pursuit initiation or participation for solely nonviolent crime. And then also to mandate the consideration of public safety factors. So in reference to the no vehicle pursuit initiation, again, that was not accepted, but the reasons provided were of course sensible. And we honestly, we expected that one never knows really what these contacts are going to result in and whatnot. But, again, this board still contends that is a property, many times drugs, weapons, felons are found after a pursuit. Understandable. So it's a tough decision, but that's a decision that was made. And we knew that was probably going to happen, but we thought we'd go out on a limb and try it anyway, just to reduce deaths, right? So required body scans, this we talked about a little earlier. This was not accepted. And the reason it was not accepted was it was going to cause operational delays and having a backup, which would then ultimately lead to deputy safety issues if there's a backup and delays with the operation. So the policy recommendation we made earlier this evening, we want to, this is also somewhat included in that, right, to kind of readdress that. And then these are recommendations pending response. There are many, but that's because we just did these over the last month or two. There's no way, and as a matter of fact, the department, I did not even officially notify via letter the department on some of these already, right? So I really, the ones that pertain to deaths, the digitally scan and disseminate non-legal mail, and then physically search or scan all persons, the ones we talked about tonight, those deal with deaths. The other ones, we talk about transgender folks with shall be taken to facility coinciding with the gender identity. We talk about, when it comes to deaths, we had some situations where the arresting officer questions on the receiving screening questionnaire upon booking, it says filled out by or answered by the incarcerated person or filled out by the arresting officer, but we really didn't know who was filling them out. It turns out that wasn't the case. So we're waiting for a response to that. And then we talk about Imperial Beach. We thought that maybe there's an issue in Imperial Beach specifically, in that we've received a few complaints over the last year and a half about deputies not responding very well to being filmed by members of the public. So we asked that the public can record police documents that the Sheriff's Department had already put out to be updated and disseminated again. Training bulletin reference handicap parking, but this one here, the expand the body worn camera protocol to mandate the uses on all law enforcement related contacts. You'll see that is very similarly worded to another one that we talked about earlier, but this, we really are specifically asking for the other one dealt with scene responses, in-person encounters. We want this to be every encounter. Like if somebody makes a telephonic complaint of something, if a deputy is calling someone back based on a law enforcement question, concern, or whatever, that we want that done as well. So that's where we are. Those are the ones that were pending response. And then also pending response are the two from probation that were very, very similar to what we asked the Sheriff's Department about, the technological devices. And that is where we stand for the annual report. I'm sure there's much more information that I could go over that's in our report, but that's just an overview. I will tell you, before this board votes to adopt this report, I will update Mr. Wilson's bio. I will include in the narrative the MOU for death scene response. I will include in the narrative the transgender situation and the recommendations that we made about that, the Imperial Beach situation we talked about. The fact that there have been no sustained uses of force resulting in great bodily injury. I mean, we were given this jurisdiction, and thus far, I think it needs to be noted that the uses of force that we've looked at thus far that have resulted in great bodily injury, we have said were legitimate, justified uses of force. I think that's that's a big deal. We haven't had any yet that we haven't said that. So that I'd like to put in. I also wanted to make sure that our annual report, the semi-annual report, reflects the fact that we have changed what we put out in our on our agenda and in our hearing notices. We do not put staff's recommendations or rationale there anymore because it was creating confusion. We now wait till this board opines and takes their final action before putting that out. So those are the things I want to make sure are incorporated. One thing that I'm not able yet to do, and I know Ms. Kink might have a word or two to say about this, I'm having a little bit of difficulty compiling the information. And the time between someone, like the time that between when someone is booked into custody and then when they either sustain or become ill or die. I wanted to present that because that's a critical piece of information. It's not there. It's difficult for me to put together because sometimes, you know, deaths happen days after the incident. You know, so I'm trying to work that out. If I can get that done, I'll make sure it's in there. If not, I will bring that back to the board hopefully next month, and it'll be in the year-end report. But I want to make sure that that's out to the public. So that's where I stand. With that, Chair Delaney, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have any comments from the public?
We have one comment from the public. It will not be that dog. It will be Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller, are you there?
Miller.
Yes, I am. Very thorough breakout. Really love it. This is the type of thing that gives everyone a global view of what's happening and what's going on. Thank you for that. As I've always said before, the natural causes need to be broken out a little more. I know that's not in your jurisdiction, but there are things that are considered natural death that may be from neglect or not getting their medication on time. For example, there was a man who was asking for his seizure medication. He didn't get his seizure medication and he seized off the top bunk and was in a coma. So those kinds of things I think need to be looked at and make sure that we're monitoring those types of natural deaths, quote unquote, natural deaths. But other than that, yes, it was a great breakout, great breakdown, and I hope it's adopted and shared with the supervisors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. And real quickly, before I get to Dr. Packard, I do want to point out that Dr. Packard, if you recall, a couple of months ago, provided some good feedback on what our annual report should include. And I listened to him because he had great information. One thing I failed to mention in my briefing was that I also included what we didn't do, what we said we would do and what we didn't do. And what that is, the number one thing, are the detention facility inspections. That's something I want to get done. We haven't done it. And the reason we haven't done it is because we're not fully staffed yet. Once our new investigator gets up and running, then that's something that we can do. Honestly, is it something I want to ask the Board of Supervisors? I'm going to ask the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer during this next budgetary cycle. I need someone specifically, and that's all they do, detention facility inspections. That's what I'd like to do. It shouldn't be me or a supervising investigator. We need to have a specialist that does this. So that's what I'm going to ask for. But that is one thing, that's a major thing we haven't done. It's not because I don't think it's important. It was our idea to bring it forward. We just haven't had the time, unfortunately. So with that, I will go to Dr. Packard.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to have had input, and I have a little more. I'm glad that these are labeled drafts, and of course you'll accept all of my edits. But one thing is more aspirational. In your mission statement, I hope that you'll get approval to expand your scope to departmental staff, so you can change your mission from peace officers to all sheriff department staff. So I really hope you all push hard and let us know in the community if we can be pushing the county to get your authority expanded. I think you should add something in your mission statement that you'll not only conduct reviews, but you'll also make recommendations, which you already do, and that you will monitor the implementation of recommendations to continuously improve the quality of the work and the department and safety for inmates and staff. Just as examples, seeing if a new training manual really led to the changes in policies and practices that you wanted. And the screening for bias, there's a little screening. Does that have an effect? That's just more research. And I'm glad that you have another analyst that I hope can work on this. on recommendation 6, looking at trends, I hope you can look deeper than just simple demographics. And like Yusuf Miller mentioned, natural deaths, that you can get more detail, or I hope the sources that give you that get more detail. And then what other variables or causal factors might be relevant and themes about the deaths. And like I said last time, a full quality improvement analysis, like Yusuf Miller's comment about, somebody falling out of bunk because they didn't get their medication, that's more than a natural death. I hope you can go more deeply with your new analysis on that. And then consider a summary statement of the overall assessment of what you've done this year. I really appreciate what Paul Parker has added to this. And where I guess that was an example about inspection. You haven't had the impact that you'd hoped. And I think other recommendations that you made that did not get accepted, some of those things about bias in the field, maybe those ought to get more looked at. And then also what you have planned for the next year. I'm really glad you're doing annual reports. They're a way to show the community what you want to do, hold yourselves accountable, and then show what you accomplished. So thanks for your work and thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Packard. Thank you. At this point, Chair Delaney, I was going to mention also part of the annual report, I did put in the 2021 annual report in reference to what Dr. Packard mentioned, was that we are continuing to pursue the jurisdiction over anybody who provides medical or mental health services, whether they're contract or not, staff, employees or not, in the detention facilities. San Diegans for Justice, we're looking at 68 of their 70 recommendations for areas of improvement, and that includes the jurisdiction over all staff and whatnot. So there are many things that will be coming that we're currently working on, many irons in the fire, so to speak, and I hope to have some more movement and a more thorough analysis, to Dr. Packard's point, for the 2022 year-end report. And with that, Chair Delaney, it's all you.
Thank you. Okay, I think I saw Mr. Wilson's hand up first, and then Mary Ann, and then Ms. King.
I concur with Mr. Parker on the use of force data. That is a big deal. I hope you can find a place where you can duly note that. And I agree, we need to make sure that people understand we have not lost track of the jail inspection thing. You covered both those points well, and I know you'll get both of them in there, and I support that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Ms. Pintar?
Thank you, Paul, for both the reports. They were really helpful in terms of just summarizing the various recommendations and what hasn't been approved or adopted and what has. One question I had for you on the cases that have been procedurally closed or summary dismissal, I think it's kind of the same for the most part, right?
No,
Not really a difference, no?
two different things. So the procedurally closed cases are cases that someone has initiated something with us. They've lodged a complaint with us. They said, hey, this happened. I don't like it. I want to make a complaint. For us to move forward, it has to be their complaint has to be signed under penalty of perjury, at which point we consider it filed. So that's procedurally closed. Summarily dismissed means we don't have jurisdiction. It was filed, it was signed, but if it's about medical care or whatnot, we don't have the jurisdiction.
So let me rephrase this in the questions. Where do cases that have been timed out fall? Procedural, summary dismissal.
Cases that have timed out in what regard? That we have dropped, like?
No, that someone comes to us and they want us to review a case, but according to our own rules, it's timed out. They have missed the timeline within which they have to file a claim.
Yeah, if they signed it under penalty of perjury, it'd be summarily dismissed based on our rules and regulations that we just don't have the time. That it's outside of our, they weren't time, it wasn't timely filed, summarily dismissed.
That would fall under summarily dismissed?
Yes, it would.
Is it possible for you to tell us how many those were before you finalized these reports? I would like to know, because that's something that I am bothered by when we get some of these cases, because it is not clear to me how clear it is to members of the public. I think that we have not had a very high profile in the community. I'm not sure how many people know that we are available to them if they want to make a complaint. Some of the cases that have come to us that have been timed out, I am really sorry that we aren't able to review or do more. And from what I can tell, that's a rule of our own making. So I don't know how we might go about changing it, or if there's interest from anyone else on the board to change it, but I'd like to explore it.
Vice Chair Pintar, to your point, this board must adopt the annual report before I present it to the Board of Supervisors. Hey, but guess what? I'm scheduled to do that next Tuesday. So I can tell you that I will compile the data you just asked for, and I will ensure that it's in the report and that I will get it to this board by tomorrow morning. I will do that. And so hopefully we can move forward adopting the report with that caveat that I'll get you that information and it'll be in the report. That's number one. Number two, absolutely ludicrous that our own rules and regulations prohibit us from looking at something. And it's so funny you're bringing this up, because this is something we've been working on over the last week or two, that prohibit us from looking at a case that is filed. Like, so for example, today is August 23rd. If someone comes to us and says, hey, last August 20th, this, that, or the other thing happened, and it seems on the surface to be somewhat egregious, unless they were incarcerated or physically or mentally incapacitated as evidenced by a doctor putting it in writing, we can't do anything about it. However, if it was egregious, if they went to the sheriff's department could. So it's kind of, you know, and granted, the sheriff's department for minor ones, they have a policy that says within 30 days, right? But I would think that the sheriff's department would be able to look at that. We are hamstringing ourselves, and it's something that I promise this board I'm already looking at. We're in the process of redoing or looking at our rules and regulations to update those for the medical and mental health care. And it's something that I want to add to and bring back to this board for approval while working with council to make us in line more with POBAR. POBAR says 1 year from the date a public agency tasked with investigating it is notified. You have 1 year to serve that notice of potential discipline. That's what I'd like us to do. And so I'll get the data for you by tomorrow morning, Vice Chair Pinto.
And then I just have one other comment, and that is that I know that you were summarizing and generalizing because you're giving you're trying to make your report concise, but I disagree with the notion that I think you said generally speaking, the Sheriff's Department thought that the recommendations we made to address racial disparities, that they could not be accepted because they provided a public safety risk. Generally speaking, that's what you said. Is that correct? I don't see how providing justification on body-worn camera is a public safety risk. I just would say that somehow I think we should separate that one from the others. That is not a public safety risk in any way, shape, or form for the Sheriff's Department to be providing their justification for stopping someone on tape once the body-worn camera has been turned on. That's my comment.
In reference to that, the public safety issues that I was primarily talking about were the enforcement of lower-level offenses that ultimately could result in a public safety concern. The body-worn camera, the reason that that's not been implemented is because there's that 30-second delay when they hit it. And so they're already, when a deputy contacts someone on a traffic stop, for example, they'll say, I'm deputy so-and-so, and the reason I stopped you is this, that, or the other thing. So the department says that that's already being said, it's just not being captured on BWC. And that at the end of the contact, especially if there's a citation or a written warning issued, the deputy says that anyway, which is captured under BWC. Now, the one thing that, and again, it's the person's stops as well that are not traffic related, that 30-second delay, right, is going to prohibit that, yeah. Right? So, but that was the reason given for that.
Okay, I'm sorry if I misunderstood.
No, I probably wasn't very clear on that one. Thank you for the opportunity to clarify.
Anything else, Ms. Pintar? Okay, Ms. Kank?
Thank you. As to the 30-second delay, I have two things to say, but as to the 30-second delay, when I was on CRB, when an officer responded to a radio call or was getting ready to pull somebody over, they hit the button on the BWC and it started. And that 30-second delay was started inside the car before they actually got up to the suspect or whoever. So, that's I'm not going with the 30-second delay. Sorry. That can be taken care of. Right? So, okay. And Mr. Parker, as you stated, it's telling to know how long people have been in custody before they've died. And I've been keeping a database on in custody deaths since January of 2020. And I have, if I know when they were arrested, and we always know their date of death, I have all of that information and I would be really happy to share it with you if that's something that you would like.
Share, I would love for you to share it with me. Number one, if you're willing to do that, that's number one. Number two, in reference to your comments about the 30-second delay, don't forget, I mean, it's the audio is not going to be there. The thing's always recording, right? You're going to see what's happening. You're just not going to hear
Right.
for that 30 seconds. Okay, but I understand what you're saying about hitting it before you get out of the car. And obviously, I think we can make it very clear that sometimes certain situations happen rather quickly, right? But again, I would defer to the department for any additional clarification on that. But that's my understanding that it's happening to the best of the department's ability at this point. That's my understanding from the department. And it's that 30-second delay where you're not going to hear the initial contact if that button's not hit, obviously 30 seconds before they walk up to the door or make that initial contact, right? So that's where we are, and I'll just defer to the department's response.
Thank you.
Did you want to ask Sergeant Brinkley regarding that, Mr. Parker?
Look, not necessarily unless the sergeant would like, to clarify, but I don't. It's up to the sergeant.
Well, Mr. Parker, I think you pretty much summed it up. I mean, everything you said is true. It has a 30-second delay. And when the deputy hits the record button, it records 30 seconds prior to him tapping the button with no audio. And then the audio will activate at 30 seconds.
Is there a reason for that? Is that just the way the cameras are set up, or the
That's the way the cameras were set up through Axon when the signed agreement was done with Axon themselves. So that's currently what we have, is a 30-second delay.
Could that be changed easily?
I don't know if it's easily changed. I'd have to get back to you on that. I think that's something that's contractual, but I'll have to get back to you on that to see if we can get an answer for that.
Could you please check on that?
I can look into that.
That'd be great.
That's something we can do.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Ware.
Well, good evening, team. I apologize for my traffic woes, but no, I think Sergeant Tingley, I think he answered that, because I remember when the BWCs first came out, that was the policy, that was the process of that 30-second delay, and I was hoping that policy, the technology would have caught up. That was, again, six years ago when it first came out. But yeah, I would love to hear that information if it can be adjusted to include that 30 seconds prior to them pushing the button. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ware. Mr. Wilson?
Yes, I've asked this same question before, and I was hoping the sheriff's department would get back to us regarding that technology. I mean, you have pre-roll on your Ring doorbell that you can hear and see. So, you know, I suspect the technology's out there and the software for the Axion cameras can be updated. So I'm just curious. So I hope somebody in the sheriff's department will research that for us and get back to us on it.
Thank you. Ms. Kinnew,
I have a different question. And I don't know if this is for Sergeant Tingley or Mr. Parker, but I wanted to see if there could be just a little bit of clarification. I saw the numbers on the in custody deaths and how it's 50% were from San Diego Central Jail. Is San Diego Central Jail like a temporary holding facility that filters into a long-term jail unit, or is it the same as Vista?
I'll answer that question for you, ma'am. The Vista Detention Facility is a booking intake facility as well as Central. Central's a bigger facility. We have more city stations or city departments booking into that facility because that's Central. It takes incarcerated persons that are female as well as male and other as well. And so does Vista. So it's just a bigger facility than Vista. Vista's a little bit smaller.
does Vista have female intake?
Excuse me, Vista has a female intake, yes, and it's a small intake, and then
Right.
they get transported down to Las Colinas.
That's right.
And Central, the females go to Las Colinas, and it's just a male intake. They also have a medical floor at Central and a psychiatric facility at Central that Vista does not have.
Ms. Kinnew, did you have another question?
Yes, I did. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
So based on that information, I'm just trying to figure it out in my head, and I apologize if I sound ignorant. What's the average time that they spend in those booking and then facilities before they move on to a long-term jail?
Well, that has changed over the years. That just depends on the charge. It used to be back in before, you know, I would say, I don't know, a while ago, it used to be that it was less than a year, and then they would be transferred over to the correctional facility. But we're holding them up to 5 years, 7 years before they're transferred. If that's not their, long term that they have, they may be transferred at that point. But we're definitely keeping them a lot longer now than we ever have because the CDC is not taking everybody that should be going over to the CDC.
So these fatalities are happening within a short time in which they are incarcerated.
I'm sorry, what was the question, ma'am?
And I'm sorry, I'm on headphones. These fatalities are happening within a short time of the time that they become incarcerated.
I'd have to look at the data to get you the exact answer for that one.
Thank you.
Ms. Pintar?
Sergeant Tinley, I think you answered the question, but I want to be clear. I thought that I understand that Vista and Central are intake facilities, but aren't there also long-term stays? I don't know if that's the right word. Longer term incarcerations at Central and Vista. They don't just immediately go through booking and intake and then get transferred out, correct?
If you're considering long-term, like in custody stay, as it relates to how long they've been told by the judge they have to be in jail, or if you're considering long-term, I think that's the question we have to answer is what do you mean by long-term?
Well, they're not just booked and moved. They're not just booked and then just moved into another facility, right? They can serve their entire sentence in Central or Vista.
They could, but we do have other facilities that are not intake facilities. So if they have a long-term, they might go to George Bailey Detention Facility.
So maybe a better way to ask is, what's the average stay at Central or Vista?
Well,
Could somebody be there for 5 years? Could somebody be there for 7 years?
I don't know what the average stay is. I'd have to look at the data, but I can tell you that if they're in, Central Jail, and they have a 5-year stint in jail, They could be there for 2 years and then transfer down to George Bailey. It all depends on what their needs are. If they have medical needs, they have things that need to be taken care of, they might go from George Bailey to Central because there's a medical floor. If they're in Vista and they cause an issue or there's a problem or there's something going on, they might transfer down to George Bailey Detention Facility to solve the problem. It just all depends on the situation. And that's why we have classification deputies and we have deputies that look at where is the best location for this person who has a 5-year stint, 7-year stint, etc.
Yes, I think that the confusion was just that people aren't just, they aren't solely intake facilities. There is also, I mean, I've toured them. People are living there for a longer time.
Correct.
That's all.
Correct, but they're considered intake facilities because we book them into custody at those facilities. George Bailey is not considered an intake facility because George Bailey does not have an intake facility where they actually come in from arresting agencies and booked in for the first time or second time or third time. So we don't consider George Bailey a intake facility. Las Colinas is Central and Vista.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. King?
So if I'm permitted, according to my database, for Vista, somebody was there for 188 days before they died. For San Diego County Jail, somebody was there for 481 days before they died, and somebody else was there for 358 days before they died. So that's long. As far as I'm concerned, that's long term. Right?
Sorry, is that a question for me, ma'am?
It was rhetorical.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Parker?
So hopefully that answers your question.
Sorry, Bonnie. Did you have another question?
No.
Okay. Mr. Parker?
You want to go to Mr. Ware first?
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Ware?
Yes, thank you. First of all, Sergeant Tingley, Ned, thank you for hanging in here. It's almost like you're part of the panel. I appreciate your response and knowledge on this. Mr. Parker, I think we've answered this before, but Ms. King, she brought up a very good point as far as the number of days. Did we have a report on the average days an inmate, the average stay of days of an inmate prior to death?
No.
Yeah,
No.
my question is, if to Sergeant Tingley's point, if they're staying longer before they go to CDC, it would stand to reason, I'm thinking, that maybe the deaths in CDC or wherever those different places they're going, those rates are lower, and because they're staying longer with us, those rates are higher. That's why I would be interested to hear the average length of stay prior to death.
I can tell you that Ms. Kink's database, does not share confidential information or anything like that. It is very well done, and it seems to indicate upon first blush, number one, it seems accurate. But out of the 30 deaths, 30 that were in custody in the detention facility that we have looked at, that this board has been presented, because there was, officer involved shooting, they're drug related outside of the detention facility. But out of the ones in the detention facility, out of 30, only about 6 or 7 have occurred within the first 2 or 3 days of someone being booked into custody. Many of these, and I'm talking definitely the majority of these, are at minimum 30 days out, some 100, some 200, some 300, some 400 days, as she's mentioned. But again, only about a third of those within maybe 2 days, 2 or 3 days. That's number one. Number two, while I have the opportunity, I don't forget, Craig Schaefer with the Finance and General Government Group did a heck of a job helping me compile or at least put together the PowerPoint presentation. I want to make a shout out to him just to make sure that I cover that. You wouldn't have a presentation tonight if it wasn't for him. So thank you for that. And I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Delaney.
Thank you. Ms. Frederico?
Thank you. I do have a question. I'm not sure who would be able to answer this. Could someone clarify what makes a facility that's determined to have like medical attention, psychiatric attention? Because I was understanding that it was Central, San Diego, and Vista that offer both. But what differentiates them from other jails? Like, is it a different amount of services, medical personnel at each jail? Can someone share more information about that? I'm trying to understand.
Yes, ma'am. They all have exactly what you said. It's just San Diego Central Jail has more. They have a bigger floor, more personnel. And if somebody needs more help than what Vista can provide, they transfer them down to that more stabilized, larger environment. So they all have medical and they all have psychiatric assistance and help in every facility. It's just, Central's bigger, has more capabilities, and it has more staff.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Chair Delaney. Oh, I see Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Wilson?
It is the Central's the only place they have dialysis chairs, right?
From my understanding, yes. And I just did a tour of the facility myself, and yes, they have dialysis available for those who need it. And if they do need it, then what happens is an incarcerated person is transferred down there and they provide that service to them, and then they transfer them back to their facility. Or if they need to stay, if the doctors say they need to stay, then they'll stay at the facility. But yes, they have a very nice setup there.
Okay.
Chair
Mr.
Delaney.
Parker, did you have?
Yeah, I did. Mr. Wilson, is it possible that you can repeat the question that you want Sergeant Tingley to look at, the one you had brought up? I did not. I think when you brought it up a few months ago, I certainly didn't move forward with it and bring it to the department. So that's my bad. That's why you don't have an answer. So can you rephrase or remind me of the question that you wanted answered? In reference to
I
that?
was curious about the ability of any BWC that has the capability to do pre-roll, where you can hear both the audio and the visual. I mean, the technology certainly should be out there to do that, because you can do it with a Ring doorbell. So I would think a company like Axion would be able to update their software to accommodate a department's requirement. So
All right,
I'm curious, if that technology exists.
Thank you for the reminder. And again, that's my fault that you don't have an answer to that yet. Sergeant Tingley, there's you and I will talk more about it, but there you go.
Thank you.
And Chair Delaney, it looks like Dr. Brown.
Dr. Brown, yeah. Hi, Dr. Brown.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. We may have covered it, but the question I'm asking is, at intake, how do they screen potential inmates for psychological challenges or mental illnesses? Has that been covered, or is that a subject for another time?
I'm thinking, Dr. Brown, that it might be a subject for another time. I think we're getting a little bit off the subject matter of the annual report, but I think we can certainly put it on the agenda or find a way to get more information to you and anybody else that might need it.
Thank you. Okay.
All right.
Thank you. And Chair Delaney, there is a request from a member of the public.
All right, let's go ahead.
Request to speak. It's Yusuf Miller.
Yusuf, okay, Mr. Miller.
Hello, everyone. Yusuf Miller. Yeah, I agree with the technology should be something easily solvable. Our cell phones can start recording and sound and visual at the same time, doorbells and many other technologies. So that's something that should be easily looked into, number one. Number two, at the annual report, is it possible, Paul Parker, if you could add the percentage of representation of each group when you break down the ethnicities, if you could put the percentage that they represent in the the county. So for example, African Americans are less than 5% of the entire county, and they're 6% of the deaths. So if those two numbers can be there with those breakdowns, I think it'll be give another picture of what's going on with disparities. And there was another one that I was thinking about, but I think I lost my track waiting for it. Anyway, thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I think that that's part of the analytical report, isn't it?
It is,
Parker?
it is, Chair Delaney. However, I will add that to our annual report.
Right. I think you can retrieve
Yeah,
those.
it's
those
right
figures.
there. It's
Right.
right there. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Do we have a motion to adopt with the revisions and the additions that Mr. Parker is going to add? We have a motion
So
to
moved.
adopt.
So moved.
I'm sorry, Dr. Brown?
So moved.
Okay. Do we have a second? Okay, Mr. Wilson? Any other discussion? Okay, Mr. Parker, could you roll please for that?
Chair Delaney,
Yes.
Vice Chair Pintar,
Yes.
Dr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Kenayuk,
Yes.
Ms. King,
Yes.
Ms. Federico Mondragon,
Yes.
Mr. Ware,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Chair Delaney, it passed.
Great, thank you. I'd like to thank the public for attending again. I really appreciate your comments and your suggestions. And with that, could we get read into, Council, could you read us into a closed session?
Pursuant to Government Code Section 54957, this board will convene into closed session to consider items 3A and 3B on tonight's agenda.
Thank you. We'll give it 5 minutes and then we'll meet right back here. Thank you.
Now sit right back